Albert was my oldest brother, and he was very smart too. He didn't have an opportunity to go to college. He worked on the farm and farmed on its own, but he was very capable and very much involved with his church also. My brother Donald and I were always good buddies, and I don't know whether this is typical in a family or not, but Albert and Warren, well, I don't know that Albert and Warren had that many interests, but Don and I were always paired up as buddies, and Warren, I guess, had the most interesting personality of all of us. He had a sort of a devil-may-care attitude, whereas the rest of us were the conservative, do-it-the-way-you're-supposed-to-do-it people. One example that stands out is when he was driving to high school. He did the driving with 3 brothers and one family car. Well, actually, I guess that was the second family car when we were just, Warren and I were going to high school. It was an old Ford. Anyway, on our way to high school, there was some obstruction in our gravel road, the country road, so Warren just went down into the ditch and kept right on going and took out quite a bit of the neighbor's fence row. Well, the neighbor saw this happening, so when we got home from school that day, we found out that Don and my dad had spent the whole day putting in a new fence for the neighbor. But I never saw very much chagrin on the part of Warren for what happened. It was just, well, they've got a new fence now.
So what was the difference in age between you and your brothers?
Well, we're all between 1.5 and 3 years apart.
And who's the oldest, and how does it go down?
Albert was born, my parents were born and were married in, they were married August 12th, 1920. Albert was born December 10th in 1922, and Donald, I think his birthday was, well, I know it was July 3rd, 1924, and I was born March 3rd, 1927, and Warren was born October 6th, I think that was 29. But he was a very sickly baby. Couldn't keep down mother's milk. He couldn't keep down skim milk. I don't know, I don't think he could keep down, well, I don't know about goat's milk and things like that, because my parents certainly weren't in a position to buy those special things. So anyway, because my mother was still helping out with farm chores, and Warren required a lot of attention as a baby, so I went to live with Grandma Stinton for a while when I was probably, around 2 or 3, and that was a very formative, very, very, very pleasant time of my life. Grandma Stinton was special. She was definitely a pillar of First Baptist Church in Morrison. And we would, she had a whole backyard full of flowers and a productive grape arbor. And when the flowers were blooming, she always took flowers to church every Sunday, decorated the altar with flowers, and then during the week she and I would make a couple calls to neighbors who were elderly and shut in, and so I learned a lot from Grandma Stinton, and she'd always answer any question that I had, and 3-year-olds have lots of questions, and it was an interesting day when Warren was feeling better, and after a year or so, well, I saw my mother in the meantime, but anyway, one day this woman came to the door, and my mother was wearing a hat that I didn't recognize, and believe me, she didn't have anything new very often, but at any rate, she said, "I've come to take Marianus," and I sort of hid behind Grandma, and I said, "I don't want to go with that lady," and Grandma said, "Well, that's your mother." So home I went.
When was your grandmother born, and when did she pass away?
My grandmother was born in 1880, and I think in Mount Carroll, Illinois, which is just maybe 20 miles north of Morrison. And when she married my grandfather, Cyrus Stinton. Actually, he was the 13th child of, in his family. They had come from England, the family, and I'm pretty sure my grandfather, Cyrus Stinton, was born in Illinois, however. But at any rate, they farmed, small farm, I think maybe 80 acres, just east of Morrison, and I guess Grandpa Stinton, he had heart problems, and I think maybe when he was in his 50s, perhaps early 50s, they moved to Morrison and bought the big, well, fairly big 2-story home on Lincoln Way, where my grandmother lived all her life until the last couple of years when she was in a nursing home in Sterling. But I think she passed away in about 1961 or 60, well, it was 1962, I guess it was, that she passed away. And she did have some problems of dementia when she was older. Not really deep, but she did have problems. She couldn't live by herself the last couple of years of her life.
Tell us about your father.
My father was born in Pontiac, Illinois, next to the oldest in 6 children, and he was always a big horse lover. I think he was probably one of the last farmers in the area to have a tractor, because he just thought horses were so dependable. And his father had lots of horses too. In fact, he had the contract to provide all of the horses for the U.S. cavalry in World War I. And my father was used to a comfortable life in Pontiac, Illinois, where you never worried about money or anything like that, but he started college at the University of Illinois, and then he had a serious goiter problem when he was a freshman and went home and never did return to college. He worked in his Uncle Abdaldi, D-O-L-D-E, his drugstore, and then after a few years he decided to work for the University of Illinois as a dairy tester. So he got in his horse and buggy, and his first assignment was in Whiteside County, where he met my mother, and the rest was history. But, you know, not growing up on a farm, it was quite an adjustment to see how harsh the life was when sometimes you had to go through a muddy lane to get to your home, and then when you did have a car, it would get stuck in the mud, and oh my, it was a difficult life.
What was most important to him?
Well, he was very honest and very ethical, and obviously fortunately that's a good type of mentor to follow. And I remember once when actually we lived on our farm that they had purchased near Morrison, and whenever we would be going to Morrison to every 2 weeks to the grocery store, or for some reason, we would always stop at Grandma Stinton's, and she would always have a freshly baked pie for us, and that was fun. One day when we were sitting there talking with Grandma and eating the pie, my dad was looking at the change he had from the hardware store, and he said, "Oh, they gave me too much change." So he went back to the hardware store. I don't know, he probably bought something that cost a couple dollars, and I don't know whether it was less than $1 in change or whatever, but he felt the necessity to go back and give them the extra money. And also, I don't think my mother, well, she probably gave up trying to get him to always be tolerant, because he wasn't quite tolerant like my mother, for sure. But anyway, he was always a very loving father.
If your parents were alive today, and if they had a message for you and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, what do you think that message would be?
I think it would be love one another, be caring of other people, and accepting of other people, and don't spend your money recklessly. You may need it, and if you don't need it, other people can certainly use your help. Those would be some of them, and they always, both my parents always emphasized learning and doing your best.